I drove 4 hours through a blinding snowstorm to surprise my wife for Thanksgiving. I found her in our bedroom, foaming at the mouth, drugged into a coma. But the real horror wasn't in the bedroom, it was on the back deck. My daughter and her husband were popping champagne with a real estate agent celebrating the sale of my home, while my wife lay dying just 20 feet away. I didn't call the police immediately. I walked out there and destroyed their celebration with my bare hands. Before I tell you how I made them pay, hit that like button and subscribe. My name is Luther Wallace, and I am 71 years old. I spent 40 years of my life as a structural engineer. I built bridges that span raging rivers and tunnels that carve through solid mountains. My job was to calculate loads, identify stress points, and prevent collapse. I dealt in concrete steel and absolute facts. I never believed in intuition until that Tuesday afternoon. The forecast called for a blizzard that would bury the state under 2 feet of snow. Most men my age would have stayed warm by the fire in the city, but something gnawed at the back of my mind. It was a friction in my gut I could not calculate. I told myself I just wanted to surprise Beatrice for the holiday. We had spent every Thanksgiving at our lake house for 20 years. It was our sanctuary. I packed my old pickup truck, engaged the 4-wheel drive, and headed north into the whiteout. The drive took 4 hours instead of the usual 2. Visibility was near zero. When I finally pulled into the long gravel driveway, the house stood dark against the gray sky. The silence of the woods was heavy, unnatural. The only sound was the ticking of my engine as it cooled. I grabbed my bag and crunched through the fresh snow to the front door. It was unlocked. That was the first warning. Beatrice never left the door unlocked. She was meticulous about security. I stepped inside, shaking the snow from my coat. The house was cold. The thermostat had been turned down. "Beatrice," I called out. My voice echoed in the hallway. No answer. I walked toward the master bedroom. A strange, sour smell hit me before I even reached the door. It was the smell of sickness. I pushed the door open and felt my heart stop in my chest. Beatrice was lying on the bed, still wearing her nightgown from the day before. Her breathing was shallow and ragged, a terrible rattling sound that filled the room. I rushed to her side. Her skin was clammy and cold. There was dried white foam at the corner of her mouth. Her eyes were half open but rolled back in her head, seeing nothing. "Beatrice," I said, shaking her shoulders. "Baby, wake up!" She groaned, a low, guttural sound of distress. Her hand, limp and heavy, twitched against the sheets. I looked at the nightstand. There was a bottle of her prescription anxiety medication. It was empty. It had been full when I spoke to her 2 days ago. Next to it was a glass of water with a powdery residue at the bottom. This was not an accident. Beatrice hated taking pills. She only took half a dose when absolutely necessary. She tried to focus on me. Her lips moved dry and cracked. "Luther," she wheezed. Her voice was barely a whisper, drowning in the fluid in her lungs. "Don't sign. Please, don't sign." Panic rose in my throat, but I shoved it down. I am an engineer. Panic does not solve structural failure. Action does. I reached for my phone to call an ambulance, but before I could dial, I heard a sound that made my blood freeze. Pop. It was the distinct, festive sound of a champagne cork leaving a bottle. It came from the back of the house. Then came the sound of laughter. Loud, boisterous, celebrating laughter. I looked at my wife, fighting for every breath, poisoned in her own bed. Then I looked toward the hallway. The contrast tore something open inside me. I gently placed Beatrice's hand on her chest. "Hold on," I whispered to her. "I will be right back." I walked down the hallway. The floorboards creaked under my boots. I moved toward the sliding glass doors that led to the covered deck. Through the glass I saw them. The heat lamps were glowing orange, fighting off the winter chill. My daughter Keisha was wrapped in a fur coat I knew she could not afford. Next to her was her husband Blake. He was a tall white man with a smile that looked like it had been bought from a catalog. He was holding a crystal flute of bubbling champagne. Sitting across from them was a woman I recognized immediately, Victoria Stone, the most aggressive real estate agent in the county. They were toasting. I slid the door open. The cold air rushed in, but the temperature on the deck seemed to drop 10 degrees just from my presence. To a quick sail, Blake boomed, raising his glass high, and to the old man finally losing his grip. Keisha laughed. It was a cruel, sharp sound. "Just make sure the paperwork is airtight before Dad finds out. One more dose for the old lady, and she will sign anything," Blake said, taking a sip. Then we can clean up this garbage dump and cash out. I stepped onto the wood. The heavy thud of my boots silenced them. Blake choked on his champagne. He spun around, his eyes wide. Keisha dropped her glass. It shattered on the deck, shards of crystal scattering across the expensive contract lying on the table. Dad, Keisha stammered. Her face went ashen. What are you doing here? You were not supposed to come until Thursday. I did not answer her. I looked at the contract on the table. It was titled Residential Sale Agreement. The sale price listed was $500,000. The house was worth $1.2 million. They were selling it for scraps. They were selling my life, my memories, and my wife's sanctuary for quick cash. I looked at Blake. He recovered from his shock quickly. He always did. He smoothed his designer jacket, a smirk returning to his face. "Well," Luther Blake said, setting his glass down, "you are early. We were just handling some business for you. Since Beatrice is indisposed." "Indisposed," I repeated. The word tasted like ash. "My wife is inside, foaming at the mouth, possibly dying from an overdose, and you call it indisposed." "She is just sleeping," Blake said dismissively. "She took a nap. Old people sleep a lot." "Look, Luther, we are celebrating. We found a buyer for this money pit. Victoria here has a cash offer." He picked up the bottle of champagne to pour another glass, as if my presence were a minor annoyance. "You need to sign as the secondary owner," Blake said. "But do not worry if you are too confused to do it. Beatrice already agreed to give Keisha power of attorney. We are just waiting for her to wake up to finalize the signature." He was lying. Beatrice would never sell this house. And she certainly would not sign a power of attorney while drugged. I took out my phone. I did not call the police yet. I snapped a photo. One clear, high-resolution picture of the three of them. The champagne. The contract. The smiles that were fading into confusion. "What are you doing?" Victoria Stone asked, covering her face with a folder. She knew. She knew this was illegal. I put the phone in my pocket. I stepped forward. I am a 71-year-old man, but I have carried steel beams on my shoulders. I have worked with sledgehammers my entire life. I grabbed the edge of the heavy oak table they were sitting around. "Luther, wait," Blake started. I heaved. With one motion, I flipped the entire table. The bottle of champagne flew into the air. The glasses shattered. The contract landed in a puddle of melting snow and alcohol. Victoria shrieked and jumped back. Keisha stood frozen, staring at the mess. "Get out," I said. My voice was low, steady, and cold as the ice on the lake. Blake's face turned red. He stepped over the debris, puffing out his chest. He was 40 years old, 6 feet tall, and thought he was invincible because he was younger than me. He walked right up to me, close enough that I could smell the expensive liquor on his breath. "You have lost your mind, old man," Blake spat. He used his chest to bump mine, trying to intimidate me. "This is not your decision anymore. We are taking control. Beatrice is unfit, and frankly, you look like you are losing it too. Do not ruin my business deal." "Your business deal," I said, looking him dead in the eye. "You are trying to sell my house to pay your debts." "I do not have debts," Blake lied. His eyes twitched. "I am an investor." "You are a leech," I said. Blake shoved me. It was a hard shove meant to knock me down. I stumbled back a step, but I did not fall. I planted my feet. I straightened my back. "You just made a mistake, Blake," I said. I pulled my phone out again and hit record. "Touch me again," I dared him. "Touch me again, and I will not just call the sheriff. I will throw you off this deck into the freezing lake myself." Blake hesitated. He looked at the rage in my eyes, and he saw something he did not expect. He saw that I was not a helpless senior citizen. He saw a man who had nothing left to lose. "Dad, stop," Keisha yelled, finally finding her voice. She stepped between us. "You are being crazy. We are trying to help you. Mom signed the papers. She wants this." "She did not sign anything," I said to my daughter. "And if she did it while you were drugging her." "How dare you," Keisha screamed. She played the victim instantly, tears welling up in her eyes. "How dare you accuse me of hurting Mom? I have been here all week taking care of her, I scoffed. "Is that what you call it? An empty bottle of pills and a coma? Get off my property," I ordered. "All of you, now." "Make us," Blake sneered. He crossed his arms. "We are not going anywhere. We have rights. We have the power of attorney. This is Keisha's house now, technically. You are the one trespassing." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a crumpled piece of paper. He waved it in my face. "See?" Blake taunted. "Signed this morning. Beatrice Wallace grants full authority to Keisha Wallace regarding all real estate and financial assets. I looked at the signature. It was a jagged, illegible scrawl. It looked like the writing of a child or someone whose nervous system was shutting down. It was the signature of a woman fighting a chemical fog. "That is a forgery," I said. Or worse, it was coerced under duress. "It is legal," Victoria Stone chimed in from the corner, clutching her purse. "I witnessed it myself." "You witnessed a crime," I told her, "and you will lose your license for it." Blake laughed. It was an ugly, desperate sound. "Nobody is losing anything except you, Luther. Call the cops. Go ahead. Tell them you barged in here and assaulted us. Tell them you trashed the place. Who are they going to believe, the successful businessman and his wife, or the angry, confused old man who just flipped a table? He was betting on my age. He was betting on the stereotype. He thought he could paint me as the villain in my own home." I looked at Keisha, my own flesh and blood. She was avoiding my gaze, looking down at her boots. She knew exactly what they were doing. She had watched her husband pour the poison, and now she was watching him threaten her father. "Fine," I said. "I won't call the police to throw you out." I turned my back on them and walked toward the sliding door. "Where are you going, old man?" "Running away," Blake called out. "No," I said, stopping at the threshold. "I am going to get my shotgun." The silence that fell over the deck was absolute. "I am giving you 3 minutes to get off my land," I said without turning around. "If you are still here when I come back out, I will treat you as intruders who have harmed my wife, and in this state I have the right to defend my home." I stepped inside and locked the glass door behind me. I could hear them shouting, arguing with each other now. The confidence was gone. I walked back to the bedroom. Beatrice was still unconscious, but her chest was rising and falling. I knelt beside her and checked her pulse. It was weak, thready. "I am sorry, Beatrice," I whispered. "I am sorry I let them in." I stood up. I did not go to the gun cabinet. I did not need a weapon to win this. I needed the truth. I needed science. I needed the law. I took out my wallet and pulled out a thin metal card. It wasn't a credit card. It was my identification for the Wallace Family Trust. Blake thought he was smart with his crumpled piece of paper. He thought a power of attorney over Beatrice gave him the house, but he had made a fatal miscalculation. He hadn't done his homework. Beatrice didn't own the house. Neither did I. We had moved the lake house, our savings, and my pension into an irrevocable trust 5 years ago. I was the primary trustee. Beatrice was the beneficiary. Keisha was a contingent beneficiary, but only after we were both dead. No power of attorney in the world could sell this house without my signature. Blake wasn't just a thief. He was an incompetent one. I dialed 911. "Emergency. What is your location?" the dispatcher asked. "My name is Luther Wallace," I said calmly. "I am at 405 Lakeview Drive. I have a medical emergency. My wife has been overdosed on prescription medication, and I have 3 intruders on my property who are refusing to leave. Send the sheriff, and send an ambulance." I hung up the phone and sat in the chair next to my wife's bed to wait. I watched the snow fall against the window. Outside on the deck, I could hear car doors slamming and tires spinning in the gravel. They were running. Let them run. They couldn't run far enough. When the sirens wailed in the distance, cutting through the storm, I knew this was just the beginning. I looked at Beatrice's pale face. "They wanted a fight," I said to the empty room. "They wanted my money. They wanted my home. They're going to wish they had never met Luther Wallace." The red and blue lights of the sheriff cruiser cut through the snowstorm, illuminating the front yard in jagged flashes. I stood in the doorway, blocking the warmth of my home from the vultures outside. Blake had not left the property. He had only retreated to the driveway to meet the law first. He walked toward the porch, now flanked by the deputy and Sheriff Miller, a man I had fished with since we were in high school. Blake held a piece of paper in his hand like a shield. He was smiling that tight, arrogant smile of a man who thinks he has found a loophole in the system. "Officer, arrest this man," Blake shouted over the wind. "He assaulted me. He destroyed property. And he is endangering his wife. I have the medical power of attorney right here." He thrust the paper toward Sheriff Miller. I stepped out onto the porch, crossing my arms. The cold bit through my flannel shirt, but my blood was running hot enough to keep me warm. I looked at the document in Blake's hand. Even from 5 feet away under the flickering porch light, I could see the signature at the bottom. It was a jagged, terrified scrawl. Beatrice had beautiful cursive handwriting. She had won awards for penmanship in grade school. That scratch on the paper was not her signature. It was the mark of a woman whose nervous system was shutting down under the weight of sedatives. "This is a legal document," Victoria Stone added, stepping out from behind Blake. She adjusted her glasses, trying to look professional despite the snow melting in her hair. "I represent the buyer. We have a signed agreement for the sale of this property for $500,000. The funds are in escrow. If Mr. Wallace prevents this sale, he will be liable for breach of contract and damages. $500,000. The number hung in the cold air. My house sat on 3 acres of prime lakefront land. I had built the reinforced retaining wall myself. I had reinforced the foundation with steel piles. The appraisal last year was $1.2 million. They were selling it for less than half its value. This was not a sale. It was a liquidation. It was a fire sale to pay off a debt so large they could not wait for market value." I looked at Victoria. "You are selling a $1 million home for $500,000 in cash. That is not a real estate transaction. That is a robbery with paperwork. It is a quick sale for cash liquidity," Blake snapped. Beatrice agreed to it. "She knows we need to diversify the family assets." "Diversify," I repeated. "Is that what you call it when you steal from the elderly?" Sheriff Miller stepped up the stairs. His boots were heavy on the wood. He looked at me, then at the broken glass on the deck, then at Blake. "Luther is your wife?" "Okay," Miller asked. He did not ask if I assaulted anyone. He knew me. He knew I did not throw punches unless I had a reason. "She is unconscious, Jim," I said, using his first name. I called the paramedics. "They are 5 minutes out. These people drugged her." "That is a lie," Keisha screamed. She came running from the car, her face streaked with mascara tears. It was a performance. I had seen her do this since she was 16 years old whenever she wanted money for a new phone or a car. "Daddy is lying. Mom took her sleeping pills because she has a migraine. He is just mad because Mom put me in charge. He is getting old, Sheriff. He forgets things. He gets violent. Look at the table he flipped." She pointed to the wreckage on the deck. She was trying to paint me as the senile, angry black man. She was using the very stereotypes I had fought against my entire career as an engineer to discredit me in my own home. Sheriff Miller took the paper from Blake. He shone his flashlight on it. "This looks like a standard power of attorney," Miller said. He looked up at me, his eyes apologetic. "Luther, if Beatrice signed this, and if she is incapacitated right now, Keisha has the legal right to make decisions for her, including who stays in the house." Blake puffed his chest out. "Exactly. And we want him removed. He is a threat to her safety. We are selling the house tonight. The new owner takes possession immediately." I felt a flash of memory. 10 years ago, Blake had come to me crying in my study. He had lost $50,000 day trading stocks. He was going to lose his car. He was going to lose his apartment. Beatrice had begged me to help him. She said he was family. She said everyone deserves a second chance. I wrote that check. I saved him. And now he was standing on my porch using a forged signature to kick me out of the house I built with my own hands. I did not move. I did not shout. I reached into my back pocket and pulled out my wallet. My fingers, thick and calloused from years of handling rebar, found the thin metal card I always carried. "Jim," I said to the sheriff, "you can read that paper all night. It does not matter." "What do you mean it does not matter?" Blake spat. "It is a legal document. It does not matter." I said, my voice dropping an octave, because Beatrice does not own this house. Blake froze. Keisha stopped crying instantly. "What?" Keisha whispered. I handed the metal card to Sheriff Miller. It was the certificate of trust for the Wallace family irrevocable trust. 5 years ago, I continued looking straight at Blake. I moved the deed of this house, our savings accounts, and my pension into a trust. I am the sole trustee. Beatrice is the primary beneficiary. She has the right to live here, but she does not have the right to sell it. Neither do I, not without a board review. And certainly not you. I took a step closer to Blake. "You did not do a title search, did you, Blake? You were so desperate for that cash that you just assumed the house was in her name. You assumed you could bully a sick woman into signing a paper and walk away with $500,000. Blake's face turned the color of the snow. He snatched the power of attorney back from the sheriff and looked at it as if it had betrayed him. "That is impossible," Blake stammered. "We checked the public records. You checked the tax records," I corrected him. "Which list the residents. You did not check the deed registry." Sheriff Miller looked at the trust card, then back at Blake. "Mr. Wallace is right," Miller said. "If the house is in a trust, this power of attorney cannot be used to sell it. And since Luther here is the trustee, he decides who is allowed on the property. Keisha let out a sound that was half scream, half sob. But we promised the buyer. We already spent the deposit. You spent money you did not have, I said coldly. That sounds like a personal problem. Sheriff Miller turned to Blake and Keisha. Folks, you need to leave. Mr. Wallace has asked you to vacate the premises. The paramedics are pulling in now and they need room to work. Victoria Stone, the realtor, did not say a word. She simply turned around, got into her luxury SUV, and drove away, leaving her client standing in the cold. She knew a lost cause when she saw one. Blake did not move. He stood there shaking. It was not from the cold. It was from a rage so pure and ugly it distorted his handsome face into something demonic. He had lost. The money was gone. The debt collectors were waiting. And he had no one to blame but his own incompetence. This is not over, Blake hissed. He stepped forward, invading my personal space. You think you are so smart, you old bastard. You think you can hoard all this money while your family starves, you selfish, stingy old man. You people always hold on to everything until you die. You people. He did not say the slur, but it hung in the air heavy and toxic. He was a white man who had married into a black family, spent our money, eaten our food, and lived under our roof, but deep down he had always felt superior. He had always felt that our wealth was an accident and that he deserved it more. I looked at Keisha. She heard it too. She heard her husband insult her father, her race, and her heritage in one breath. But she said nothing. She just stared at the ground, defeated by her own greed. Sheriff Miller put a hand on his holster. That is enough, son. Get in your car. Blake turned to leave, but he stopped. He looked at the coat rack by the door where they had hung their expensive jackets when they arrived. I want my coat, Blake said. It is freezing out here. I looked at the coats. Keisha's faux fur and Blake's designer wool trench coat were hanging inside the warm foyer. I grabbed them. I bunched the expensive fabric in my fist. You want your coats? I asked. I threw them over the railing hard. They landed in a pile of wet, dirty slush at the bottom of the porch stairs. Get them yourself, I said, and do not ever step foot on my stairs again. Blake cursed, scrambling down the stairs to retrieve his soggy coat. Keisha followed him, sobbing real tears, now the tears of a child who realizes the candy store is closed forever. I watched them retreat to their car. The paramedics rushed past them, carrying a stretcher up the stairs. I turned my back on my daughter and her husband. I focused on the only thing that mattered, my wife, the woman who was fighting for her life in the bedroom because I had been too blind to see the snakes in my own grass. As the ambulance doors closed, I knew the war was far from over. I had won the battle for the house. But now I had to find out why they were so desperate. I had to find out how much damage they had really done. And I had to make sure they paid for every single milligram of poison they put in my wife's body. I sat in the back of the ambulance, watching the heart monitor trace jagged green lines that represented my wife's life. The vehicle swayed violently as the driver navigated the unplowed mountain roads. Every bump sent a jolt of panic through my chest. I have stood on suspension bridges during hurricanes and never felt fear like this. Beatrice lay strapped to the gurney. Her skin was the color of ash. The oxygen mask fogged with each shallow, rattling breath. Suddenly, the rhythm on the monitor changed. It went from a slow beep to a frantic, erratic drumming. Beatrice arched her back. Her limbs began to thrash against the restraints. She was seizing. The paramedic shouted something to the driver and injected a clear liquid into her IV line. I tried to reach for her hand, but the paramedic pushed me back. He told me to stay seated. I gripped the metal bench until my knuckles turned white. I am a man who fixes things. If a beam cracks, I reinforce it. If a foundation sinks, I shore it up. But I could not fix this. I watched the woman who had slept beside me for 40 years convulse under the fluorescent lights. I watched her fight a war against a chemical enemy I could not see. I felt a tear run down my face. It was hot and angry. I wiped it away. I needed to be strong. I needed to be sharp. When the seizing stopped, Beatrice went limp. She looked smaller than I had ever seen her. I leaned forward and took her cold hand in mine. I squeezed it 3 times. It was our secret signal. It meant, I love you. She did not squeeze back. The siren wailed outside, a lonely sound in the snowstorm, screaming at the world to get out of the way, because Beatrice Wallace was dying. The waiting room at the county hospital smelled of antiseptic and stale coffee. I paced the linoleum floor. I counted the tiles, 14 across, 20 down, 280 tiles. I was calculating the load-bearing capacity of the floor joists just to keep my mind from snapping. After an hour that felt like a decade, the double doors swung open. A doctor walked out. He looked exhausted. He was young, maybe 35, with tired eyes. He looked at his clipboard and then at me. "Mr. Wallace," he said. I stopped pacing. I stood straight. "Tell me," I said. He gestured for me to sit, but I refused. "I take bad news standing up." The doctor took a deep breath. "Your wife is stable for now," he said. "We managed to stop the seizures and stabilize her heart rate. But we found something disturbing in her toxicology screen." I felt a cold knot tighten in my stomach. "What did you find?" I asked. "We found high levels of benzodiazepines in her system," the doctor said. "It is a powerful sedative. But that is not all. We also found a blood alcohol concentration of 0.2. That is more than double the legal limit. The combination of benzos and alcohol causes respiratory depression. It shuts down the brain's ability to tell the lungs to breathe. She was drowning in her own body." I stared at him. "Alcohol," I repeated. The word felt foreign. "My wife does not drink, doctor. Beatrice has been a teetotaler for 30 years. She does not even cook with wine." The doctor's expression hardened. He looked at me with a new intensity. "Are you certain?" he asked. "I am absolutely certain," I said. My voice was low and dangerous. "If there is alcohol in her system, someone put it there." The doctor nodded slowly. He closed the metal folder of his clipboard with a snap. "That changes everything," he said. "An overdose of pills could be an accident or confusion. But forcing alcohol into a non-drinker alongside sedatives implies intent. Mr. Wallace, this is not a medical mishap, this is poisoning. I am legally required to notify the police." I looked at the doctor. "Do it," I said. "Call them now. Call the detectives. I want everything documented. I want the blood samples preserved. Do not throw anything away." He nodded and turned to walk back to the nurse's station. I watched him go. My hands were shaking not from fear, but from a rage so pure it felt like lava in my veins. They didn't just want her asleep. They wanted her dead. I heard her before I saw her. Keisha's voice echoed down the hospital corridor, loud and demanding. She was putting on a show. "Where is my mother?" she screamed. "I demand to see my mother." I stepped out of the waiting room and stood in the middle of the hallway. Keisha came rounding the corner with Blake trailing behind her. She had changed her clothes, but she still wore the same desperate, greedy expression. When she saw me, she stopped. Her eyes narrowed. "Dad," she said, marching toward me. "The doctors called me. They said she is stable. We are transferring her." I stood my ground. "Transferring her where?" I asked. "To a private facility," Keisha said quickly. "Blake has a friend who runs a high-end clinic in the city. They will take better care of her than this public dump. We need to get her out of here now." I knew exactly what she was doing. A private clinic meant private doctors. It meant NDAs. It meant losing the chain of custody on the blood samples. She wanted to move Beatrice to a place where they could control the narrative and bury the evidence of the alcohol and pills. "You are not moving her an inch," I said. I crossed my arms over my chest. Keisha stepped into my personal space. She was hysterical, her hands flying. "I am her daughter," she yelled. "I have rights. That power of attorney is still valid until a judge says otherwise. I am taking my mother out of here." She reached for the door handle of the ward. I moved faster than a man my age should move. I grabbed her wrist. It was the same wrist she used to pour champagne while her mother lay dying. I squeezed it hard enough to make her gasp. "Do not touch that door," I said. "Let go of me," she shrieked. She tried to pull away, clawing at my hand with her manicured nails. Blake stepped forward, puffing up his chest again. "Hey, get your hands off her," he shouted. I shoved Keisha back. She stumbled into Blake and they both nearly fell. I stood in the doorway, filling the frame. My shoulders were broad from a lifetime of labor. I looked at the security guard who was running down the hall. "Officer," I called out, "these people are suspects in an attempted murder investigation regarding the patient in room 304. They are not allowed entry." Keisha's jaw dropped. "Murder," she whispered. The word hung in the air. I looked at my daughter. The little girl I had carried on my shoulders, the woman who had just tried to kill my wife for a real estate commission. "You are not a daughter anymore, Keisha," I said. "You are a suspect, and if you try to enter this room again, I will not just block you, I will break you." The security guard arrived breathless. He looked at my face, then at the terrified look on Keisha and Blake. He saw who was protecting the patient and who was the threat. "Folks, you need to leave," the guard said to them. Keisha looked at me one last time. There was no love in her eyes, only fear. They turned and ran. I watched them go. I knew they were running to destroy evidence, but I was already 2 steps ahead of them. I sat in the plastic chair in the corner of the waiting room. The air conditioning hummed a low, monotonous drone that grated against my nerves. Most people in my position would be pacing the floor or weeping into their hands. I did neither. I sat perfectly still. I opened my heavy-duty laptop on my knees. It was a machine built for construction sites, thick and rugged with a battery that could last for days. For 40 years, I calculated the load-bearing capacity of suspension bridges. I looked for microscopic stress fractures in concrete that could eventually bring down 1,000,000 tons of steel. I know how things break. People think buildings collapse suddenly without warning. They do not. They fail slowly over time. A hairline crack here, a rusted bolt there. The collapse is just the final loud symptom of a disease that started long ago in silence. I was about to find the structural crack in my family foundation. I logged into the bank portal. Keisha and Blake thought they were clever. They thought because I still used a flip phone for calls and wore work boots that I was technologically illiterate. They forgot that I used complex structural modeling software before they were even born. I had set up our family trust accounts with dual authentication years ago. I was the primary administrator. I had alerts set for large withdrawals, but I had foolishly turned them off last month because Beatrice was buying new furniture for the church sanctuary and I did not want to be bothered by the notifications. That was my mistake. A structural engineer never assumes a safety factor holds forever. You must always inspect. I navigated to the joint checking account I shared with Beatrice. The screen populated with numbers. I scanned the ledger. My eyes are old, but they do not miss details. I looked for the patterns. Financial forensics is just like structural analysis. You look for the load that exceeds the design limit. And there it was. A series of transactions starting exactly 2 weeks ago. Small at first, testing the waters. Then the dam broke. I stared at the screen. The blue glow of the pixels was harsh against my tired eyes. The transaction history was a roadmap of betrayal. November 10th, $500 to an online sportsbook. Beatrice did not watch sports. She certainly did not bet on them. November 11th, $2,000 to the same site. November 12th, $5,000. I scrolled down. The dates accelerated. The amounts grew larger. It was a spiral of addiction and desperation. Then the spending shifted. There were charges at a high-end men's boutique in the city. $3,000 for a custom suit. $1,200 for Italian leather shoes. My wife was lying in a hospital bed wearing a 10-year-old nightgown while her son-in-law was dressing himself like a Wall Street banker using her life savings. I felt a heat rise in the back of my neck. It was the specific kind of anger you feel when you see someone desecrating something sacred. Beatrice saved coupons. She drove an extra mile to save 10 cents on a gallon of gas. She did not do this out of necessity. She did it out of principle. She wanted to leave something substantial for her granddaughter Jasmine. Blake was burning that legacy on vanity and vice. I clicked on the credit card statement. It was maxed out. They had raised the limit without my authorization. How did they do that? I remembered Keisha asking for her mother's social security number last month to help with Medicare paperwork. It was a lie. She used it to verify the identity for the bank. I pulled out my notepad and a pen. I started writing down every fraudulent charge. I added them up column by column. The calculator on my screen displayed the final number, $41,250. In 10 days, they had bled her dry. They had not just drugged her to sell the house. They drugged her because she had likely noticed the missing money. She had probably confronted them. That was the timeline. She confronts them about the bank account. They panic. They drug her. They try to sell the house to cover the hole before I find out. It was a desperate, sloppy collapse, and like any collapse, it was going to crush everyone underneath it. My phone buzzed on the metal armrest of the chair. It was Morrison, my lawyer. He was a shark in a tailored suit, a man who cost $500 an hour and was worth every penny. I answered on the first ring. "Talk to me," I said. Luther Morrison said. His voice was grim. "We ran the background check on Blake like you asked. It is worse than we thought. Tell me," I said. "He is not a tech investor," Morrison said. "He is not even from this state. His real name involves a hyphen and a sealed juvenile record in Illinois. He ran a Ponzi scheme in Chicago 3 years ago. He ripped off the wrong people. What people, I asked. The kind of people who do not file lawsuits, Luther. They break legs. He fled to this state to hide. But they found him. My investigator found chatter on the dark web. He owes $800,000 to a syndicate in Chicago. They gave him a deadline. When is the deadline? I asked, though I already suspected the answer. Tomorrow, Morrison said. The day after Thanksgiving. If he does not pay, they are coming for him. I hung up the phone. I looked out the window at the parking lot. The snow was piling up on the cars, burying everything in white. It all made sense now. The rush to sell the house, the lowball price, the cash offer. Blake was not trying to get rich. He was trying to buy his life. He was willing to kill my wife and sell my home just to keep his kneecaps intact. I closed my laptop. I was not dealing with a greedy relative anymore. I was dealing with a cornered rat, and rats bite when they are trapped. It was 3 a.m. and the hospital cafeteria was a ghost town of fluorescent lights and empty tables. I sat in the corner with a cup of coffee that had gone cold an hour ago. I was staring at the wall, calculating the load limits of my own sanity, when my phone buzzed. It was an unknown number. I almost ignored it, but my gut told me to answer. I flipped the phone open. "Grandpa," a voice whispered. It was Jasmine. She was crying. "I am outside. Please come get me. I am hiding behind the dumpster in the emergency bay." I ran. I moved faster than I had in 20 years. The automatic doors hissed open and the freezing wind hit me like a hammer. I scanned the dark parking lot. I saw a small shadow crouched behind the large metal trash containers. Jasmine. She was wearing nothing but a thin hoodie and jeans, no coat, in a blizzard. Her teeth were chattering so hard she could barely speak. I stripped off my heavy canvas jacket and wrapped it around her. She buried her face in my chest and sobbed. Her body was shaking violently, not just from the cold but from terror. I pulled her toward the warmth of the hospital entrance, keeping my arm tight around her shoulders. We sat in the back of the waiting area, away from the prying eyes of the night shift nurses. I got her a hot chocolate from the machine. I watched her drink it, her hands trembling around the paper cup. I saw a bruise forming on her wrist. It looked fresh. "What happened?" I asked. My voice was low and controlled, but inside I was burning. "He locked me in," Jasmine said, staring at the steam rising from the cup. "Blake. He put a padlock on my bedroom door. He said I wasn't allowed to leave until I signed the papers." "What papers?" I asked. "An affidavit," she said. He typed it up on his laptop. "It said that I saw you hitting Grandma. It said that you have a history of dementia and violence. He wanted me to sign it so they could show it to the judge tomorrow. He said if I didn't sign it, he would send me to a foster home. He said he would tell them I was on drugs and that you were supplying me." I looked at my granddaughter. She is a straight-A student. She volunteers at the animal shelter. She has never touched a drug in her life. Blake was projecting his own filth onto her. "Where was your mother?" I asked. I needed to know. "She was in the kitchen," Jasmine whispered. "She was drinking wine. She heard him yelling at me. She heard him drilling the lock into my door. She just turned up the music, Grandpa. She didn't do anything. That broke me. A mother protecting her child is a fundamental law of nature like gravity. Keisha had broken that law. She chose a thief over her own blood." "How did you get out?" I asked. "I climbed out the window," she said. "We are on the 2nd floor. I had to jump from the ledge to the dumpster. I think I twisted my ankle." I looked down. Her ankle was swollen. She had jumped 12 feet into the snow to escape her own father. I felt a cold, hard resolve settle in my chest. This was no longer a family dispute. This was a war. Jasmine reached into the pocket of her hoodie. She looked around nervously as if Blake might jump out from behind a vending machine. "I stole something," she said. "Before he locked me in, his phone was charging on the kitchen counter, not his regular phone. The cheap flip phone he keeps in his glove box, the one he thinks nobody knows about." She pulled out a black plastic burner phone and placed it in my hand. "He uses this to talk to the bad men," she said. I heard it ringing while he was screaming at me. He was too busy finding the padlock to notice I swiped it. I looked at the device. It was a cheap disposable piece of technology, the kind drug dealers and criminals use to avoid a paper trail. It was heavy in my hand, heavy with potential. I opened it. It wasn't password protected. Arrogance is a structural flaw. Blake assumed he was smarter than everyone else. He assumed his 19-year-old stepdaughter was too scared to fight back. I navigated to the text messages. There was only one thread. The contact was saved as Chicago. I started reading. The messages went back 3 months. They painted a picture of a man drowning in debt and looking for a life raft made of human misery. "Where is the money?" Blake one message read. "You are out of time. Need 2 more weeks," Blake had replied. "The old woman is sick. She is going fast. She better go fast," the reply said. "Or you go fast." I scrolled down to yesterday. The timestamp was 2 hours before I arrived at the lake house. "It is happening today," Blake wrote. "She took the cocktail. She will be out cold by noon. I have the realtor coming at 1. We sign the papers, I get the cash deposit, and I wire you the first installment tonight." The cocktail. He admitted to dosing her. He admitted to the timing. But the next message was the one that stopped my heart. "What if she wakes up?" the loan shark asked. "She won't," Blake replied. "And even if she does, she won't last the week. The dosage is cumulative. Her liver is already failing. She is dead walking. I will sell the house right after the funeral." I stared at the small glowing screen. The words blurred for a second, then snapped into razor-sharp focus. She won't last the week. They hadn't just given her too many sleeping pills to knock her out for a signature. They had been poisoning her systematically. They were counting on liver failure. They had calculated the depreciation of my wife's life against the interest rate of a gambling debt. This was premeditated murder. It was written right here in black and white pixels. I looked up at the hospital clock. It was 4 a.m. Beatrice was in a room 3 floors above us, hooked up to machines that were filtering her blood, fighting a battle we didn't even know she was in until today. "They calculated her death date," I whispered. Jasmine looked at me. Her eyes were wide and red-rimmed. "Grandpa," she said, "is Grandma going to die?" "Not today," I said, "and not by their hands." I closed the phone and put it in my shirt pocket, buttoning the flap. It sat against my chest like a shield. This was the nail in the coffin. This was the evidence that would put Blake in prison for the rest of his life. And Keisha. My daughter knew. She had to know. You don't listen to your husband talk about funerals and sales contracts without knowing the timeline. I looked at Jasmine. She was shivering again, the adrenaline wearing off, leaving only exhaustion and trauma. She was a child who had lost her home, her parents, and her safety in one night, and she had risked everything to bring me the weapon I needed. I pulled her into a hug, my arms strong from years of lifting steel wrapped around her fragile frame. I held her tight, trying to squeeze the fear out of her. "You did good, Jasmine," I said into her hair. "You did so good," she cried into my shirt. "I am sorry, Grandpa. I am sorry I didn't tell you sooner. I was scared." "Do not apologize," I said firmly. "You are the bravest Wallace in this family right now." I looked over her shoulder at the dark hospital corridor. My grief was gone. My shock was gone. What was left was a cold, mathematical precision. I was an engineer. I knew how to dismantle things. I knew how to find the keystone and pull it out to bring the whole structure crashing down. Blake and Keisha were a faulty structure. They were built on rot and lies. And I was going to be the demolition crew. I released Jasmine and looked her in the eye. "We are going to go upstairs," I said. "We are going to sit with your grandmother. And when the sun comes up, we are going to finish this." Jasmine nodded. She wiped her face with her sleeve. She looked a little less like a victim and a little more like a survivor. "What are we going to do about the phone?" she asked. "We are going to give it to the only man in this town I trust," I said. I stood up. My knees popped, but my legs felt steady. I took my granddaughter's hand. We walked toward the elevators. I touched the phone in my pocket one more time. Blake wanted a funeral. I was going to give him one. But it wasn't going to be Beatrice's. It was going to be his. I sat in the leather armchair of my study in our main residence. The house was quiet, a stark contrast to the chaos of the hospital emergency room I had just left. Beatrice was stable monitored by nurses and guards I had personally hired. Now I had to deal with the infection outside the hospital walls. I picked up my phone. My hands were steady. I dialed Keisha's number. It rang once. She answered immediately, her voice sharp and defensive. "What do you want now, Dad?" she asked. "Are you calling to threaten us again with your shotgun?" I took a deep breath, forcing my voice to sound weary. I forced it to crack just enough to sound like a 71-year-old man who was broken and tired. "I am done fighting Keisha," I said. I looked at the numbers. I looked at the medical bills coming in. Maybe you and Blake are right. Maybe I cannot handle this alone anymore. There was a pause on the line. I could hear her breathing change. She covered the receiver, whispering something to someone, likely Blake. When she came back, her tone was softer, dripping with that fake concern that made my skin crawl. "We told you, Dad," she said. "We only want to help. It is a lot of pressure for a man your age." "I want you to come over for dinner tonight," I said. "Here at the main house. Bring Blake. We need to sit down like a family. We need to talk about the future. We need to talk about dividing the assets properly if I am going to step down as trustee." I hung the bait. Asset division. It was the only language they understood. "Tonight," she asked, hesitating slightly. "We are pretty shaken up from yesterday." "Tonight," I insisted. I made a roast. I opened a bottle of wine. "If we are going to fix this, we do it now. Or I call my lawyer back and we do it the hard way." "We will be there at 7, she said quickly. I hung up the phone. They took the bait. They thought I was surrendering. They thought the fear of losing Beatrice and the pressure of the situation had finally cracked the old engineer's foundation. They did not understand that in construction sometimes you dig a hole not to bury a body, but to pour a trap. I walked to the dining room. I set the table for 3. I put out the good china. I sharpened the carving knife. I placed it next to my plate. The steel glinted under the chandelier. I was not cooking a roast. I ordered takeout from the corner bistro and put it on fancy platters. I did not have the stomach to cook for parasites. I sat at the head of the table and waited. At 7 o'clock sharp, the doorbell rang. They walked in like they owned the place. Blake was wearing a new suit, likely bought with the credit card he stole from my wife. He carried a bottle of wine that I knew cost less than $10. He had a swagger in his step, the confidence of a man who thinks he has won the lottery. Keisha walked in behind him, clutching her designer bag. She looked around the foyer, her eyes assessing the furniture, probably calculating how much it would fetch at an auction. "Thank you for coming," I said, gesturing to the dining room. "Sit." We sat. The air in the room was thick enough to choke on. I poured the wine Blake had brought. It smelled like vinegar. I filled his glass to the brim. I filled Keisha's. I poured water for myself. So Luther Blake started unbuttoning his jacket as he sat down. "I am glad you came to your senses. It was getting ugly back there at the lake. We forgive you, of course. Stress does crazy things to people." He picked up his fork and stabbed a piece of meat. He did not wait for grace. He did not wait for me. "I just want to know the plan," I said quietly. "If I hand over control, what is the strategy?" Blake's eyes lit up. He chewed quickly and swallowed. "It is all about leverage, Luther," he said, waving his fork in the air. "See, the problem with you and Beatrice is that you are asset rich but cash poor. That house at the lake is just sitting there. It is dead equity. My plan is business 4.0. We liquidate the real estate. We take that capital and we move it into high-yield algorithmic crypto markets." He was using buzzwords he had probably heard on a podcast. Algorithmic crypto markets. It meant nothing. It was smoke. "I have a contact in the city." Blake continued, his voice rising with excitement. "He is developing a new platform, guaranteed 20% returns monthly. We dump the million from the house into that, and in a year, we have tripled the family wealth. Keisha and I will manage the portfolio. You and Beatrice can go to a nice assisted living facility in Florida. You won't have to worry about a thing." I listened. I watched his mouth move. I watched the greed shine in his eyes. He was talking about gambling my life's work on a scam because he was desperate. Keisha nodded along, playing the role of the visionary's wife. "It really is the best option, Dad," she said. "Blake is so smart with money. You built bridges, sure, but the economy has changed. You need modern thinking. We just want to make sure you and Mom are comfortable. We were so hurt when you accused us of hurting her." I cried all night. She wiped a non-existent tear from her cheek. I looked at her. My daughter. The woman I taught to ride a bike. The woman whose tuition I paid. She was sitting there eating my food, telling me that the man who poisoned her mother was a financial genius. I gripped my water glass under the table. I squeezed it until I felt the glass start to flex. I wanted to reach across the table and shake the life out of him. I wanted to scream, but I held it in. Tension is useful energy if you direct it. "Is that right?" I asked. 20% returns. And this contact in the city, does he have a name? Blake hesitated for a fraction of a second. "It is a private equity group," he said, "very exclusive. I cannot drop names yet, but I have the prospectus right here." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded brochure. He slid it across the table. It was a printout from a website. It looked like something a high school student made. I did not look at it. I looked at him. "It sounds like you have it all figured out, Blake," I said. "You seem very eager to get that cash, almost like you were on a deadline." Blake stopped chewing. He laughed a nervous hacking sound. "Business moves fast, Luther. You snooze, you lose." I reached into my own pocket. I did not pull out a checkbook. I did not pull out the trust documents. I pulled out a small black plastic flip phone. I placed it gently on the table right next to the wine bottle. The silence that followed was instantaneous. It was the silence of a bomb tech cutting the wrong wire. Blake froze. His fork hovered halfway to his mouth. His eyes locked onto the cheap burner phone. He recognized it. Of course he recognized it. It was his lifeline. It was his secret. "What is that?" Keisha asked, looking confused. She looked from the phone to Blake, then back to the phone. I reached out with one finger and tapped the screen. It lit up. There was a new text message on the display. It had arrived 10 minutes ago while Blake was bragging about algorithmic markets. I had read it before they walked in. I spun the phone around so they could both read the screen. The message was short. It was from the contact saved as Chicago. It read, "You missed the payment window, Blake. We know where your father-in-law lives. We are sending a crew." Blake made a sound like a dying animal. His hand spasmed. The fork clattered onto his fine china plate with a sound like a gunshot. The piece of meat flew onto the white tablecloth, leaving a greasy stain. "Where did you get that?" Blake whispered. His face went from flushed to ghostly pale in a heartbeat. The sweat broke out on his forehead instantly. Keisha leaned forward and read the text. Her eyes went wide. She grabbed Blake's arm. "Blake, what is this?" she demanded. "Who is Chicago? What payment window?" I leaned back in my chair. I crossed my arms. The mask was gone. The tired old man was gone. The engineer was back. "This is your business plan, Blake," I said coldly. "This is your business 4.0. You are not an investor. You are a mark. You owe $800,000 to loan sharks, and you were going to sell my house to pay them off." "No," Blake stammered. He pushed his chair back. The legs screeched against the hardwood floor. "That is not mine. You planted that." "Stop it," I barked. My voice boomed in the dining room. "Do not lie to me again. My granddaughter gave me that phone. She took it from your car while you were busy locking her in her bedroom." Keisha gasped. She looked at her husband with horror, not because he was a criminal, but because he had been caught. "Jasmine gave it to you," Keisha whispered. "Yes," I said, "because she has more integrity in her little finger than you two have in your entire bodies." Blake looked at the phone, then at the door. He was calculating the distance. He was realizing that the walls were closing in. The phone buzzed again on the table. The vibration rattled the silverware. Another message appeared on the screen. "Send the money now or the old man bleeds first." I looked at Blake. "They are coming for me, Blake," I said. "Because of you." Blake stood up. He knocked his chair over. "We have to go," he said to Keisha. "We have to go right now." "Sit down," I ordered. "I am leaving." Blake shouted. He was panicking. He was a rat in a burning cage. "You can leave," I said calmly. "But my lawyer already sent a copy of these texts to the FBI and the local police. And the men coming for you, they are not looking for me. They are tracking the GPS on that phone." I pointed at the burner phone sitting on my dining table. "And right now that phone says you are here." Blake looked at the phone as if it were a radioactive isotope. He lunged for it. He grabbed it off the table and threw it against the wall. It shattered into pieces. "You crazy old fool," Blake screamed. "You led them right to us." I picked up my wine glass. I took a sip of water. "I didn't lead them anywhere, Blake. You did. I just set the table. You destroyed the phone, Blake, but you cannot destroy the data cloud." I reached under the table and pulled out a thick manila envelope that my lawyer Morrison had couriered to the house an hour before dinner. I tossed it onto the white tablecloth. It landed with a heavy thud right between the spilled wine and the fine china. "What is this?" Keisha asked, her voice trembling. She was looking at her husband with wide, terrified eyes, but Blake refused to look at her. He was staring at the envelope like it was a bomb. "Open it, Keisha," I said. "Read the first page." She reached out with a shaking hand and slid the papers out. I watched her face as she read. I watched the confusion turn to disbelief and then to horror. It was a forensic accounting report of Blake's activities over the last 3 years. It detailed every loan, every gamble, and every lie. This says I took out a loan for $200,000, Keisha whispered. She looked up at me. Dad, I never took out a loan. I have a 700 credit score. I am careful. Keep reading, I said. Look at the date. Look at the signature. She flipped the page. She gasped. It was a digital copy of a loan agreement from a predatory lending firm in Nevada. The interest rate was 60%. The signature at the bottom was hers, but it was clearly forged. The notary stamp belonged to a woman who had been dead for 2 years. He stole your identity, Keisha, I said, my voice flat and hard. He used your social security number, your maiden name, and your credit history to secure bridge loans when his own credit tanked. You do not just have a husband with debt. You are the debt. You owe $200,000 to criminals, and you did not even know it until right now. Keisha turned to Blake. She held the paper up her hand, shaking so violently it made a rattling sound. Tell me this is a mistake, Blake, she pleaded. Tell me Dad is lying. Tell me you did not do this to me. Blake did not answer. He was breathing hard, his eyes darting around the room looking for an exit that did not exist. He maxed out your cards first, I continued relentlessly. Then he took out a second mortgage on your condo in the city. Then when he ran out of legal options, he went to the sharks using your name as collateral. Why do you think he was so desperate to sell the lake house, Keisha? He was not trying to build a crypto empire. He was trying to pay off the bounty on your head before they came to collect it. You monster, Keisha screamed. The sound tore through the dining room. You told me you were protecting our future. You told me you were handling the finances because you were better at math. You were stealing from me. You were drowning me. She stood up, knocking her chair backward. She threw the papers in his face. I trusted you, she wailed. I helped you drug my mother because I thought we were partners. I thought we were building something. And you were just using me as a shield, Blake snapped. The pressure vessel finally burst. He stood up and slapped the papers away, his face contorted into a mask of pure ugliness. He was done pretending to be the suave businessman. He was done pretending to be the loving husband. The rat had turned into a wolf. Shut up, you stupid woman, Blake roared. He grabbed Keisha by the shoulders and shook her hard. Do not act innocent now. You liked the clothes, didn't you? You liked the dinners. You liked pretending you were high society. Where did you think the money came from, Keisha? Did you think it fell from the sky? I thought you were working, Keisha sobbed, trying to push him away. Working. Blake laughed, a cruel barking sound. I was hustling. I was keeping us alive while you played house. And you were useless, Keisha. Absolutely useless. He shoved her backward. She stumbled against the sideboard, knocking over a vase. I married you for one reason, Blake spat, stepping toward her. I married you because you said your parents were loaded. You said your dad was a big-shot engineer with millions in the bank. You said your mom was soft and easy to manipulate. But you could not even close the deal, could you? He pointed a finger in her face, poking her hard in the forehead with every word. You could not get the money, he shouted. You could not get the signature. You could not even handle your own mother without screwing it up. You are a parasite, Keisha. Parasite. A useless, whining parasite who does not know how to extract value from her own assets. I saw the realization hit Keisha like a physical blow. He had never loved her, not for a second. She was just another mark. She was just another bridge he planned to burn once he crossed it. I hate you, Keisha screamed. She lunged at him, clawing at his face. Her nails raked down his cheek, leaving red lines. Blake roared in pain and anger. He grabbed her by the throat. He lifted his fist. He was going to beat her. He was going to hurt my daughter right there in my dining room in front of my eyes. He pulled his arm back, his eyes black with violence, ready to strike her down. Click. The sound was small, but in the silence of the room it sounded like a cannon shot. It was the mechanical sound of a safety being disengaged. Blake froze. His fist hovered in the air. He looked past Keisha to the head of the table. I was standing. In my right hand, resting steady on the white tablecloth, was my Colt 1911. It is a heavy gun made of steel and history. I have owned it for 30 years. I kept it clean, I kept it oiled, and right now it was pointed directly at the center of Blake's chest. Let her go, I said. My voice was not loud. It did not need to be. It was the voice of a man who knows exactly how much pressure it takes to pull a trigger. Blake's eyes went wide. He looked at the gun, then at me. He slowly lowered his fist. He released Keisha's throat. She collapsed to the floor, gasping for air, holding her neck. Are you crazy? Blake whispered. You are going to shoot me. I am not crazy, Blake, I said. I am protecting my home. In this house we do not hit women, and we do not threaten family. You are threatening me, he said, raising his hand slowly. No, I said. I am establishing order. You came into my house, you ate my food, you insulted my lineage, and now you try to beat my daughter. That stops now. I gestured with the barrel of the gun. Sit down, I ordered. Blake hesitated. Sit down, I barked. He sat. He collapsed into his chair like a puppet whose strings had been cut. He was sweating profusely now. The arrogance was gone, replaced by the primal fear of a man facing consequences for the first time in his life. Keisha. Get up, I said to my daughter. Sit in your chair. Keisha pulled herself up. She was shaking uncontrollably. She sat down opposite her husband, wrapping her arms around herself. She looked at me with terror, but also with something else. Gratitude. For the first time in years, she looked at me and saw her father, not an ATM. I kept the gun on the table. I kept my hand on the grip. My finger was outside the trigger guard, disciplined and ready. We are going to finish this dinner, I said. And you are going to listen to what is going to happen next. This is not a negotiation. This is a sentencing hearing. And I am the judge. The heavy oak door to my study creaked open behind me, slicing through the tension in the dining room like a cold draft. Blake jumped in his seat, his eyes darting from the gun on the table to the shadow emerging from the hallway. He thought we were alone. He thought this was just a family dispute that could be solved with yelling and violence. He was wrong. I do not enter a structural failure zone without a safety team. Morrison stepped into the light. My lawyer was a man who looked like he was carved out of granite and dressed in a $3,000 suit. He held a thick leather briefcase in one hand and a stack of legal documents in the other. He did not look at Blake or Keisha. He looked at the gun on the table, then at me. Safety on Luther Morrison, said his voice calm and deep. I will take it from here. I engaged the safety on the Colt and slid it back toward me, but I did not put it away. Blake stared at Morrison. He recognized him. Everyone in the city recognized Morrison. He was the kind of lawyer you hired when you wanted to burn the earth so nothing would ever grow again. Who is this? Blake stammered. This is a private dinner. This is a deposition. Morrison corrected him. He walked to the table and dropped the stack of papers in front of Blake. The sound was heavy, almost metallic. You have been served, Morrison said. Blake looked at the papers. His hands were shaking so hard he could barely lift the cover page. What is this? Blake whispered. That is a civil lawsuit filed on behalf of the Wallace Family Trust, Morrison explained. We are suing you for fraud, embezzlement, identity theft, and elder abuse. We are also seeking immediate injunctive relief to freeze all assets connected to you and your wife. Keisha let out a strangled cry. Freeze our assets, she asked. But we do not have any assets. We are broke. We know, Morrison said coldly. That is why we are freezing your access to Mr. Wallace's assets. He pulled another document from the pile. This is a forensic audit of the credit cards you stole from your mother. Morrison continued looking at Keisha. And this is a court order granting Mr. Wallace full emergency control over every account you have ever touched. As of 5 minutes ago, your bank accounts have been locked. Your credit cards have been flagged for fraud. You cannot buy a pack of gum in this city without a red flag going up at the district attorney's office. You cannot do that, Blake shouted, standing up again. I have rights. You have the right to remain silent, Morrison shot back, and I suggest you use it because right now I am the only thing standing between you and a federal indictment. Blake looked at me. He looked for the father-in-law he had manipulated for years. He saw only a wall. You set us up, Blake hissed. You invited us here to ambush us. I invited you here to settle the ledger, I said. You wanted to talk about finances. So let us talk. You owe me $41,000 for the theft from Beatrice. You owe me $50,000 for the loan I gave you 10 years ago, which I am now calling in with interest. And you owe me for the pain and suffering of my wife. I pointed at the papers. Sign the acknowledgement of receipt, I said. I am not signing anything. Blake spat. Morrison smiled. It was not a nice smile. It does not matter if you sign, Morrison said. You have been served in the presence of a witness, and the clock is ticking. Suddenly the room was bathed in flashing red and blue lights coming from the driveway. The silence shattered. What did you do? Keisha screamed, running to the window. Why are the police here? I stood up. I picked up my gun and holstered it at my hip. "They are not here to arrest you yet," I said. "They are here for asset recovery." I walked to the front door and opened it. Sheriff Miller was standing there again, but this time he wasn't alone. He was accompanied by a tow truck driver and 2 deputies. The massive tow truck was already backing up to the Mercedes G-Wagon parked in my driveway. The SUV that Keisha drove. The SUV she loved more than she loved her own daughter. "Hey, stop that," Blake yelled, running out the door past me. "That is my car. You cannot touch that." Sheriff Miller stepped in front of Blake, his hand resting on his belt. "Step back, son," Miller warned. "We are executing a repossession order. That car belongs to Luther Wallace Construction," I said, stepping out onto the porch. "I bought it 5 years ago as a company vehicle. I let Keisha drive it as a favor." Keisha ran out into the cold. She was not wearing a coat. "No, Dad, please," she begged, grabbing my arm. "I need that car. It is my image. It is all I have." "It is company property," I said, pulling my arm away. "And you are not an employee. You never were." I looked at the tow truck driver. "Hook it up," I ordered. The driver nodded and started lowering the boom. The sound of chains rattling was the only music Keisha deserved. Sheriff Miller turned to Blake and Keisha. "I also need you to turn over any and all keys to properties owned by Mr. Wallace," Miller said. "That includes the lake house, the main residence, and any keys to his vehicles." Blake looked at me with pure hatred. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a keychain. He threw it on the ground at my feet. "Take them," he spat. "I do not want anything from you. Everything," I said. Miller stepped forward. "Empty your pockets, Blake." Blake froze. He looked at the sheriff, then at me. "Do it," Miller said, his voice hardening. Blake reached into his jacket. He pulled out a wallet. "Open it," Miller commanded. Blake opened the wallet. "Remove the credit cards," Miller said. "Specifically the American Express and the Visa ending in 4092. "Those are my cards," Keisha cried. "They are supplementary cards on my account," I corrected her. "And I am revoking your privileges." Blake pulled the cards out. He handed them to Miller. Miller handed them to me. I took a pair of shears from my pocket, the ones I used for gardening, and cut the cards in half right there on the porch. The plastic snapped with a satisfying crunch. Keisha watched the pieces fall into the snow. She looked like she was watching her own limbs being amputated. "My phone," she whispered. "You pay the bill for my phone." "I do," I said. I took my own phone out and dialed the service provider. I had the number on speed dial. "Cancel the lines ending in 5501 and 5502, I said into the receiver. "Yes, effective immediately. Lost or stolen. Thank you." Keisha's phone, which she was clutching in her hand, went dark. The screen didn't turn off, but the signal bars vanished. She was disconnected. She was offline. For a woman like Keisha, that was a fate worse than death. "You are stripping us," Blake said, his voice trembling with rage. "You are leaving us with nothing." "I am leaving you with exactly what you earned," I said. "Nothing." The tow truck engine roared. Truck engine. The Mercedes lifted into the air, its alarm chirping once before falling silent. The driver secured the chains. "Get off my property," I said. Sheriff Miller pointed to the end of the driveway. "You heard him," Miller said. "Move along." "But we do not have a car," Keisha wailed. "How are we supposed to leave?" "Walk," I said. Blake looked at the long, dark driveway. It was a mile to the main road. The snow had stopped falling, but the ground was covered in ice. The temperature was dropping. "You cannot do this," Blake said. "It is freezing." "You should have thought about that before you tried to kill my wife," I said. I turned around and walked back into the house. Morrison followed me. Sheriff Miller stayed on the porch watching them to make sure they left. I stood by the window in the dining room watching them. They stood in the driveway, bathed in the harsh security lights. They looked small. They looked pathetic. Blake turned on Keisha. I could not hear the words through the double-paned glass, but I saw the body language. He was screaming at her. He was waving his arms, pointing at the house, then at her. He was blaming her. He was blaming her for not securing the money. He was blaming her for his debts. He was blaming her for his own incompetence. Keisha was crying, reaching out for him, trying to grab his arm. She was begging him. She was terrified of being alone. Blake shoved her away. He pushed her hard enough that she slipped on the ice and fell to her knees. He did not help her up. He spat on the ground next to her. Then he turned and started walking. He walked down the driveway, his expensive leather shoes slipping on the snow. He buttoned his suit jacket against the wind, but it was flimsy protection. He walked away into the darkness, leaving his wife kneeling in the slush. Keisha watched him go. She screamed his name. I could hear it faintly through the glass. Blake. Blake, come back. He did not look back. He kept walking until the darkness swallowed him. Keisha sat there in the driveway of the home she grew up in, the home she tried to steal. She was alone. Her husband had abandoned her. Her father had rejected her. Her mother was in the hospital because of her. She looked up at the window. She saw me standing there. She raised a hand as if to wave or to beg. I reached out and closed the heavy velvet drapes. I turned back to the room. Morrison was packing his briefcase. "Is it done?" he asked. "It is done," I said. I sat down at the table. The gun was still there. The food was cold. The wine was spilled. I poured myself a glass of water. My hands were finally shaking. Not from fear, but from the adrenaline crash. I had just dismantled my family. I had just thrown my daughter to the wolves. But then I remembered Beatrice's face in the hospital bed. I remembered the foam at her mouth. I remembered the text message on the burner phone. She won't last the week. I took a drink of water. It tasted clean. They made their choice, I said to the empty room. Now they have to live in the cold. I sat in the dark of my study, illuminated only by the blue light of my laptop screen. It was 2 a.m, but sleep was a luxury I could not afford. My phone buzzed incessantly on the desk. It was not a call. It was a notification from social media. Someone had sent me a link. I clicked it. A video popped up. It was a live stream recorded an hour ago. The background was dark and snowy. The only light came from a street lamp overhead. It was Keisha. She was sitting on the curb at the end of my driveway, shivering in the cold. Her makeup was smeared. She looked broken. She looked like a victim. But when she started speaking, I realized she was not broken. She was calculating. "Please help me," Keisha sobbed into the camera lens. "I am homeless. My own father just kicked me out into a blizzard. He took my car. He took my cards. He left me here to freeze." She paused to wipe her nose with the back of her hand. The comments on the side of the screen were scrolling by so fast they were a blur. "Poor girl. What a monster. Call the police. He hates me." Keisha continued, her voice trembling with practiced emotion. "He has always hated me because I dared to marry a white man. He is a bigot. He called my husband horrible names. He said he would never let a white man inherit his money. That is why he did this. He framed Blake. He made up lies about us stealing just so he could destroy our marriage. He is a tyrant. He hits my mother. He hits me. And now he has locked me out because I tried to protect my mom from him." I watched in silence. My hands gripped the edge of the mahogany desk. I have lived 71 years as a black man in America. I have fought for every inch of respect I have. I built bridges that connect communities. And now my own daughter was using the pain of our history as a weapon against me. She was painting me as the villain in a racial drama she had invented. She knew exactly what buttons to push. She knew the internet did not care about facts. It cared about outrage. "He has my daughter too," Keisha wailed, looking directly into the camera. "He kidnapped Jasmine. He is holding her hostage in that house. Please, someone help me get my baby back." The video ended. The view count was at 50,000 and climbing. I looked at the comments. They were calling for my head. They were doxing my address. They were calling the local news stations. Keisha had lit a match and thrown it into a warehouse full of gasoline. She was desperate. She was alone. And she had decided that if she was going down, she was going to burn my reputation to the ground first. By sunrise, my house was a fortress under siege. I woke up to the sound of shattering glass. A brick had flown through the front bay window, landing on the living room rug amidst a shower of shards. Wrapped around the brick was a note. It said, "Abuser." I walked to the window, stepping over the glass. Outside on the sidewalk, there were news vans. Reporters were setting up cameras, pointing them at my front door like rifles. A small crowd of protesters had gathered, holding hastily made signs. They were chanting slogans they did not understand. They thought they were fighting for a battered woman. They did not know they were defending a predator. I closed the blinds. I went upstairs to check on Jasmine. She was sitting on her bed, her knees pulled up to her chest. She was staring at her phone. She was crying. "They are posting my picture, Grandpa," she whispered. "They are finding my friends from school. They are sending them messages saying you are a kidnapper. They are saying I am brainwashed." She showed me her screen. Her social media inbox was flooded with hate. Strangers telling her to run. Strangers telling her she was stupid for staying with me. Strangers threatening to come rescue her by force. Turn it off, Jasmine, I said gently, taking the phone from her hand. Do not look at it. But it is everywhere, she sobbed. They are destroying us. Even my teachers are sharing the video. Nobody believes us. Mom looks so sad in the video. She lies so well. I sat on the edge of the bed. I felt the weight of the house pressing down on me. I calculated the load, the public pressure, the legal threat, the danger to my family. It was immense. It was crushing. For a moment I felt a crack in my resolve. Maybe I should have just paid them off. Maybe I should have let them take the money. But then I looked at the bruise on Jasmine's wrist where her father had grabbed her. I thought of Beatrice in the hospital fighting for air. This is not real, Jasmine, I said. This is noise. It is a storm. And like any storm, it will pass if the foundation is strong. We know the truth. The truth doesn't matter if they burn the house down, she said, looking at the window where the chanting was getting louder. The truth always matters, I said. It just needs to be louder than the lie. I stood up. I went downstairs. I did not go to the front door to talk to the reporters. I did not issue a statement. I went to the basement. My home network was built with the same redundancy as my bridges. I had a server rack in the utility room that stored terabytes of data. Every security camera on my properties fed into this system. The cameras at the main house, the cameras at the construction yard, and the cameras at the lake house. Keisha and Blake thought they were smart. They thought they had disabled the security system at the lake before they arrived. They had cut the Wi-Fi router cable. I saw the alert on my phone 2 days ago. But they did not know about the backup. They did not know that the cameras had local SD cards that recorded even when the internet was down. And they certainly did not know that the new system I installed last month uploaded the footage to the cloud via a cellular backup connection the moment motion was detected. I sat down at my workstation. I logged into the security interface. I scrolled back to Tuesday morning. The timestamps flickered on the screen. 10:00 a.m. Blake and Keisha arrive. 10:15 a.m. They enter the house. 10:30 a.m. Kitchen camera. I clicked play. The image was crisp. It was 4K resolution. The audio was crystal clear. There was Beatrice sitting at the kitchen island. She looked tired but alert. She was drinking tea. Blake was standing behind her, rubbing her shoulders. Keisha was at the stove. Here, Mom, Keisha said, turning around. I made you some fresh herbal tea. It will help with your headache. She handed Beatrice a mug. Beatrice smiled. She thanked her daughter. She trusted her. I watched my wife take a sip. Then I saw it. The camera angle was perfect. While Beatrice was blowing on the hot tea, Blake reached into his pocket. He pulled out a small vial. He looked at Keisha. Keisha nodded. She deliberately distracted her mother, pointing out something in the snowy yard. Look at that cardinal, Mom, Keisha said. Beatrice turned her head. Blake tipped the vial over her mug. A clear liquid poured into the tea. He did it quickly, casually. He put the vial back in his pocket. Beatrice turned back. She took a long drink. I watched them. I watched my daughter and her husband exchange a look over my wife's head. It was a look of pure malice, a look of victory. I fast-forwarded. 11:00 a.m. Beatrice is slumped on the counter. Her speech is slurring. I feel so dizzy, she mumbled. It is just the medicine, Mom, Blake said, laughing. You need to sleep it off. He grabbed her under the arm. He dragged her. He did not help her walk. He dragged her like a sack of cement toward the bedroom. Keisha followed, holding the contract. I stopped the video. I sat in the silence of the basement. The chanting outside was muffled. The brick in the living room was forgotten. Keisha wanted a media war. She wanted to play the victim on a screen. She wanted to use video to destroy me. I looked at the file on my computer. I right-clicked. I selected download. You want to be famous, Keisha? I whispered to the screen. I am going to make you famous. I picked up my phone. I dialed the number for the news station that was currently parked on my lawn. I did not want an interview. I wanted to make a donation to their investigative journalism department. Send a producer to the back door, I said when they answered. Come alone. I have something you are going to want to air on the 6 o'clock news. I bypassed the local news van parked on my lawn. They were looking for sound bites and drama. I was looking for a verdict. I sent the files to the investigative unit at Channel 4 in the city. They were the station with the widest reach in the state and an anchor known for breaking corruption scandals. I uploaded the security footage, the audio files, and the toxicology report I had received from the hospital. Then I sat back in my leather chair and turned on the television. It was 6:00. The evening news intro played. The anchor looked serious. She looked into the camera and said, "Tonight, we have a disturbing update on the viral story of the Lake House eviction. What you are about to see may be shocking to some viewers." My heart hammered a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs. On the screen, the footage from my kitchen began to play. It was in high definition. The timestamp was clear. There was Beatrice sitting at the island, trusting and vulnerable. There was Keisha distracting her, pointing out the window at a bird that did not exist. And there was Blake. The camera caught the light reflecting off the small glass vial in his hand. It caught the clear liquid splashing into the steaming mug. But the audio was what sealed their fate. The microphone picked up Blake's chuckle. It was a low, nasty sound, the sound of a man who thinks he has gotten away with murder. Then came his voice, clear as a bell. "Drink up, Mom. It will help you sleep." I watched the broadcast. I watched the anchor freeze frame the video right as Blake poured the poison. She zoomed in. She brought up the toxicology report next to his face. Lethal levels of sedatives mixed with alcohol, the graphic read. Then she played the clip of Keisha celebrating on the deck, holding the champagne glass while her mother lay in a coma 20 feet away. The contrast was brutal. It was undeniable. It stripped away the narrative of the poor, victimized daughter and revealed the cold, calculating predator underneath. Outside my house, the noise changed. The chanting stopped. The shouting died down. I walked to the window and peered through the blinds. The protesters were looking at their phones. I saw a woman who had been holding a sign that said, "Save Keisha, lower it slowly to the ground." She looked at the house, then she looked at her friends. They started walking away. They left their signs in the snow. They realized they had been marching for a monster. The news van started packing up. They were not leaving to go home. They were leaving to find Keisha. The story had flipped. I was no longer the villain. I was the father who had caught a snake in his kitchen. The digital backlash was instantaneous and violent. The internet is a pendulum, and when it swings back, it cuts deep. Keisha had built her entire defense on the court of public opinion. She had invited the world into our family business, hoping they would destroy me. Now that same world was turning its gaze on her. My phone started buzzing with notifications from friends and neighbors, people who had been too afraid to call me when I was the bad guy. Now they were all apologies and outrage, but I did not care about their apologies. I cared about the notification that popped up on the local news feed an hour later. Keisha worked at a prestigious private preschool in the suburbs. It was a place that prided itself on family values and safety. Parents paid $20,000 a year to send their children there. They trusted the teachers implicitly. Within 30 minutes of the broadcast, the school's social media pages were flooded. Parents were demanding answers. They were asking why a woman who poisoned her own mother was allowed to supervise their toddlers. They were threatening to pull their children out immediately. The school board did not hesitate. They did not wait for a hearing. They went into damage control mode. Keisha called me at 8:00. She was hysterical. Her voice was so high and frantic I could barely understand her. "Daddy, what did you do?" she screamed. "The headmaster just called me. I am fired. They fired me via email, Dad. They said I violated the morals clause. They said I am a liability. I have 10 years of tenure. You ruined my career. You poisoned my wife," I said into the phone. My voice was calm, cold, and absolute. "You drugged your mother. You toasted to her death. Did you think there would be no consequences? Did you think you could smile for the cameras and hide the knife behind your back forever?" "But I am a teacher," she sobbed. "That is all I know how to do. Who is going to hire me now? My face is everywhere. They are calling me the champagne killer." "No one is going to hire you, Keisha," I said. "You are done. You destroyed your own name. You traded your reputation for a chance at a quick payday, and you lost both." I heard Blake shouting in the background. He was panicking. He sounded like a trapped animal. "We have to leave," he was yelling. "We have to go now, Keisha. Get off the phone." I hung up on her. I did not need to hear any more. I looked at the comments on the news article. Thousands of them. People analyzing her body language in the video, people calling for her arrest, people digging up old photos of her spending money she did not have. The internet was dissecting her life piece by piece. She wanted fame. I gave it to her. Now she was the most famous woman in the state for all the wrong reasons. The most dangerous eyes watching that broadcast were not the parents at the preschool or the neighbors on the street. They were watching from a dark room in Chicago. The syndicate. The loan sharks Blake owed $800,000 to. They did not care about justice. They did not care about morality. They cared about their investment. And tonight they saw their investment evaporate on live television. For weeks, Blake had been stalling them. He had been telling them that the house sale was a done deal. He had told them the old man was senile and the old woman was dying. He had promised them that the moment the deed transferred, he would wire the funds. The news broadcast shattered that lie. It showed the world that I was not senile. It showed that I was fighting back. It showed that the house was tied up in a trust and now a criminal investigation. It showed that there would be no sale. There would be no money. The gold mine was closed. I sat in my study and watched the headlights of a car move slowly down the street. It was a black sedan with tinted windows. It drove past my house, slowing down but not stopping. It was not a news van, it was not a police cruiser. It was a shark circling the water. They knew where I lived, but they also knew I was not the one who owed them money. I was the one who had exposed the debtor. Blake's phone would be ringing right now. Not the burner phone I destroyed, but his real one. Or maybe they wouldn't call. Maybe they would just show up. Blake knew this. That was why he was screaming in the background of Keisha's call. He knew the clock had run out. He wasn't afraid of the police anymore. The police would just put him in a cell. These men would put him in a box. I walked to the window and checked the locks. I activated the perimeter alarm. I was safe. My house was a fortress. But out there in the cold in a cheap motel or his parents' basement, Blake was running out of places to hide. The real hunt had begun. The world thought this was a story about a greedy family. They didn't know it was about to become a story about survival. Blake had invited the devil into our lives to pay his bills. Now the devil was here to collect, and he didn't take checks. The week following the broadcast was a blur of legal maneuvering, but the most persistent annoyance was not the criminal investigation. It was Victoria Stone. The real estate agent who had toasted champagne on my deck while my wife lay dying was not going quietly into the night. She was a woman driven by a hunger for commissions that overrode all human decency. She filed a civil suit against the Wallace Family Trust for breach of contract and loss of income. She claimed she had brought a willing and able cash buyer to the table and that my intervention had cost her a $30,000 commission plus damages for reputational harm. She dragged me into a mediation hearing at a downtown law firm. I walked into the conference room with Morrison. The room was lined with mahogany and smelled of floor wax. Victoria sat at the far end of the long table next to her lawyer, a man who looked like he chased ambulances for a living. Victoria looked tired. Her professional veneer was cracking. The scandal had touched her too, but she was fighting like a cornered badger. She wanted her cut. Mr. Wallace signed a listing agreement through his agent Keisha Wallace. Her lawyer began without preamble. "We have a valid contract." The buyer deposited earnest money. Mr. Wallace's dramatic display at the property and subsequent media circus caused the buyer to withdraw. "We are seeking full compensation." Victoria leaned forward. Her eyes were hard and cold. "I did my job, Luther," she said. "I found a cash buyer in 24 hours. I do not care about your family drama. I do not care about the criminal charges against your son-in-law. That is not my business. My business is selling houses, and I sold yours. You owe me." I looked at her. I saw a woman who would sell the nails out of her own coffin if the price was right. She was completely unaware of the structural flaw in her entire argument. She was arguing about the paint color on a building that had no foundation. "Are you done?" I asked. "I am done when I get a check," Victoria snapped. I looked at Morrison. He was smiling that shark smile of his. He opened his briefcase. He did not pull out a checkbook. He pulled out a single aged document protected in a plastic sleeve. It was not a new document. It was 10 years old. I slid the document across the polished table. It stopped right in front of Victoria. "Read the deed, Victoria," I said. "Read the whole thing. Not just the tax assessment. Read the restrictions." Victoria looked confused. She picked up the paper. She adjusted her glasses. I watched her eyes scan the legal text. I watched the moment she hit the paragraph that mattered. Her face went slack. The color drained out of her cheeks, leaving her looking gray and old. "What is this?" she whispered. 10 years ago, Beatrice was diagnosed with stage 3 ovarian cancer," I said. My voice was steady, but the memory still hurt. The insurance had caps. The experimental treatments were expensive. We needed cash fast, but I refused to mortgage our future to a bank. So I made a deal. I pointed at the document in her hand. I sold the land rights to the State Nature Conservancy, I explained. The lake house sits on a protected watershed. They wanted to ensure no one would ever develop condos on that shoreline. They paid me $600,000 for the development rights. In exchange, I retained what is called a life estate. I leaned forward. "Do you know what a life estate is, Victoria?" I asked. She did not answer. She just stared at the paper, her hands trembling. "It means Beatrice and I have the right to occupy the structure until the moment of our deaths," I said. "We own the right to live there. We do not own the dirt, and we do not own the future of that house. The contract states clearly that upon the death of the surviving spouse, the structure is to be demolished and the land returned to its natural state." I sat back in my chair. "The house has a market value of $0, I said. "It cannot be sold. It cannot be transferred. It cannot be inherited. It is a ghost asset. It exists only as long as I draw breath." Victoria dropped the paper. It fluttered to the table. "You mean," she stammered, "you mean the house is worthless?" "Commercially, yes," I said. "To me it is priceless. To a buyer it is a liability. You were trying to sell a house that legally does not exist on the market. If you had done a proper title search instead of rushing for a quick cash grab with a desperate con artist, you would have known that." Her lawyer picked up the document. He read it quickly. He closed his file. He put his pen in his pocket. "We are done here," he said to Victoria. "You have no case. You cannot sue for commission on an illegal sale." Victoria looked at me with pure hatred. But under the hatred, there was humiliation. She had been outsmarted by an old man she thought was senile. She had staked her reputation on a phantom. But the real impact of this revelation was not on Victoria Stone. It was on the two people who were not in the room. It was on Blake and Keisha. I looked out the window of the high-rise office. I thought about my daughter and her husband sitting in some cheap motel room hiding from the police and the loan sharks. I thought about their master plan. They had drugged Beatrice. They had risked life in prison. They had destroyed their family. And for what? To inherit a house that was scheduled for demolition. They thought they were killing us for $1 million payday. In reality, they were killing us for nothing. If they had succeeded, if Beatrice had died, and if they had managed to kill me too, they would have gone to the reading of the will and found out that they owned absolutely nothing. The state would have come in with bulldozers the next week. It was the ultimate punchline to a joke they didn't even know they were telling. Morrison started laughing. It was a dry, dark sound. "They tried to commit murder for a depreciating asset," he said. "They are not just evil Luther. They are stupid, historically stupid." I did not laugh. I felt a deep, heavy sadness. My daughter was so blinded by greed she never bothered to ask me about my life. She never asked how I paid for her mother's cancer treatment. She never asked about the legacy of the land. She just saw a big house and assumed it was a pile of gold waiting to be looted. She saw the facade, I said. She never checked the foundation. Victoria stood up. She grabbed her purse. She did not say sorry. She did not look at me. She walked out of the room, her heels clicking a retreat on the hardwood floor. Her lawyer followed her, leaving the settlement papers unsigned on the table. We walked out of the building into the cold autumn air. I took a deep breath. The air tasted clean. "That is the end of the civil threats," Morrison said. "Now we watch them eat each other." I nodded. The legal war was over. The house was safe because it had never been in danger. But the war on the streets was just heating up. Blake had promised $1 million to violent men. He had promised them the proceeds from the sale of the lake house. Now the word would get out. The house was unsellable. The money did not exist. Blake was a man who had sold a bridge he did not own, and the people who bought the toll booth were coming to collect. The call from Sheriff Miller came at 2 a.m. It was the kind of call you expect when you deal with men who solve problems with tire irons instead of lawsuits. They found Blake. He was not at a hotel. He was not at the airport. He was dumped on the sidewalk in front of the emergency room entrance, the same place where he had tried to block me from seeing my wife. He was conscious, but barely. The sheriff told me the details with a grim satisfaction. Blake had tried to negotiate with the collection crew from Chicago. He tried to sell them the story about the trust being a mistake, about the house still being sellable. They did not listen. They broke his index finger and his middle finger on his right hand. The fingers he used to sign checks. The fingers he used to hold a champagne glass. It was a message. It was a receipt. I drove to the hospital not to comfort him but to verify. I stood in the doorway of his room. He was bandaged and bruised, his face swollen to twice its size. He looked at me with one good eye. There was no arrogance left. There was only the hollow terror of a man who knows the debt is not paid. The broken fingers were just the interest payment. The principal was still due. And since Blake had no money, the creditors would look for the next available asset. They would look for the co-signer. They would look for the wife. I walked away from his room without saying a word. I had nothing to say to a man who was already dead. The sharks would wait for him to heal just enough to work, and then they would bleed him for the rest of his life. But my business was not with Blake anymore. It was with the person he had dragged into the pit with him. I was back in my kitchen making tea for Beatrice when my phone rang. It was Keisha. I put it on speaker. Her voice was a high, thin shriek of panic. "Daddy, you have to help me. They are outside. I see the car, the black sedan. They are sitting in front of the motel. I knew she was hiding in a cheap motel on the outskirts of town. I knew because I had been tracking her phone location not to help her, but to keep her away from us. Keisha," I said calmly, checking the water temperature. "You should call the police." "I cannot call the police," she sobbed. "Blake put my name on the loan documents. He forged my signature on the guarantee, but the sharks do not care about forgeries. They think I am the partner. They think I have the money from the house sale. They sent me a picture, Dad. They sent me a picture of Blake's hand. They said, 'I am next. Please, Dad, wire me $50,000, just enough to make them go away for a week. I will pay you back. I swear.'" She was begging for her life. A father's instinct is to protect. It is biological. It is hardwired into the DNA to shield your offspring from fire. My hand wavered over the counter. For a split second, I calculated the cost. $50,000 to save her legs. $50,000 to buy her time. Then I heard the footsteps behind me. Beatrice walked into the kitchen. She was leaning on a cane, moving slowly. Her face was pale and she had lost 10 pounds since the poisoning, but her eyes were clear. The fog of the sedatives was gone. She looked at the phone on the counter. She heard her daughter begging for money to pay off the hitmen she had invited into our lives. Beatrice reached out. Her hand shook slightly, but her grip was firm. She took the phone from the counter. She held it to her ear. Mom, Keisha cried, sensing the change on the line. "Mom, tell him to help me. I am your baby. I made a mistake, Mom. I am sorry. I just wanted us to be happy. I did not mean for you to get hurt. Please, Mommy, do not let them hurt me." I watched my wife. I watched the woman who had nursed Keisha through chicken pox, who had sat up nights helping her with homework, who had defended her every time I said she was spoiled. I saw 40 years of love harden into something unbreakable and cold like tempered glass. Beatrice took a breath. It was a deep, strong breath, the first full breath she had taken in weeks without chemical interference. "You did not make a mistake, Keisha," Beatrice said. Her voice was not loud, but it filled the room. "You made a plan. You watched your husband pour poison into my tea. You sat there and watched me drink it. You asked me about the birds outside so I would turn my head. Mom, please," Keisha wailed. "Stop," Beatrice ordered. The command was absolute. "Do not call me Mom. You lost that right when you calculated how many days it would take for my liver to fail." "But they are going to kill me," Keisha screamed. "Then you should have thought about that before you tried to kill me," Beatrice said. I looked at my wife. I saw the pain in her eyes, the terrible grief of a mother cutting off her own limb to save the body. But I also saw dignity. She was reclaiming her life. She was refusing to be the victim. "Mom, please save me," Keisha begged one last time, her voice dissolving into terror. Beatrice looked out the window at the snow covering the garden she had planted. "I do not have a daughter who is a murderer," Beatrice said. She pressed the red button on the screen. The call ended. The silence that rushed back into the kitchen was heavy and final. Beatrice put the phone down on the counter. She did not cry. She looked at me. "Is the tea ready?" she asked. "Yes," I said. I poured her a cup. She took it with both hands, letting the warmth seep into her fingers. We stood there in the quiet of our home, the home they tried to sell, the home they tried to empty. We were alive. We were together. And for the first time in a long time, we were safe. The phone did not ring again. Keisha knew. She knew that the well was dry. She knew that the bridge was burned. She was on her own in the cold with the monsters she had created. And as I watched my wife sip her tea, I knew that justice was not always a gavel in a courtroom. Sometimes justice was simply a dial tone. I thought I had seen the bottom of the barrel when my daughter toasted to my wife's death, but I was wrong. The bottom was much deeper. 2 days after Blake was beaten and hospitalized, Keisha made her final desperate move. She did not run. She did not hide. She walked into the family court and filed an emergency ex parte motion for guardianship over Beatrice. Her argument was a masterpiece of fiction. She claimed that I was an abusive husband suffering from early-onset dementia. She claimed I was isolating Beatrice to control her finances and that I was medically neglecting her recovery. She asked the court to grant her immediate control over Beatrice's medical decisions and her assets, including the monthly pension checks and the disability payments. It was a terrifying strategy because it relied on the prejudice of the system against angry old men. She knew that if she could get a temporary order, she could drain the accounts before anyone realized the truth. She was banking on the fact that the family court operates separately from the criminal investigation, and she hoped to slip through the cracks of bureaucracy before the indictment came down. I stood in the hallway of the courthouse with Morrison. My hands were shaking not from fear, but from a rage so intense it felt like a vibration in my bones. Beatrice was inside, sitting in a wheelchair, looking frail but determined. She insisted on coming. She said she wanted to look her daughter in the eye when the gavel fell. Keisha was sitting on the other side of the hallway. She was wearing a modest gray dress and no makeup. She looked like a saint. She looked like a concerned daughter fighting for her mother. She refused to look at me. She was staring at her phone, likely checking to see if the loan sharks had sent her another death threat. She was not fighting for custody because she loved her mother. She was fighting for custody because Beatrice was her last human shield. If she controlled Beatrice, she controlled the money. And if she controlled the money, she might live another week. It was survival cannibalism. We walked into the courtroom. The air was stale and cold. The judge was a tired-looking woman who clearly had too many cases and not enough time. Keisha's lawyer stood up. He was a court-appointed attorney, young and aggressive, looking to make a name for himself. He did not know the full story. He only knew what Keisha had told him. He painted a picture of a household of horrors. He described me as a tyrant. He talked about the gun I pulled at dinner. He talked about how I threw them out into the snow. He made it sound like I was a monster terrorizing a young couple who only wanted to help. Your Honor, the lawyer said, his voice echoing in the quiet room. Mr. Wallace is unstable. He is violent. He brandished a loaded weapon at a family dinner. He has cut off his daughter from all financial support, leaving her destitute. He is clearly suffering from paranoia and cognitive decline. We believe Beatrice Wallace is in immediate danger under his care. We are asking for emergency removal and full guardianship to be awarded to the daughter, Keisha Wallace. I sat there and listened to him twist my life into a weapon against me. I listened to him take my protection and turn it into abuse. I listened to him take my discipline and turn it into dementia. I gripped the oak table until my knuckles turned white. I wanted to stand up. I wanted to shout that I was a structural engineer who had built the foundations of this city. I wanted to shout that I had saved every penny for 50 years to protect my family. But I knew that if I shouted, I would prove them right. If I lost my temper, I would lose my wife. Mr. Wallace, Keisha's lawyer said, turning to face me, "Is it true that you keep a loaded firearm in your dining room?" "It is true," I said, my voice low and steady. "Is it true that you pointed that firearm at your son-in-law?" "I pointed it at a man who was strangling my daughter," I said. The lawyer smirked. "So you admit to using lethal force as a negotiation tactic?" I felt the blood rushing to my ears. It was a trap. He was baiting me. He wanted the angry black man. He wanted the stereotype. I looked at Keisha. She was dabbing her eyes with a tissue, playing the part perfectly. She was willing to destroy my character, destroy my history, just to get her hands on a checkbook. Mr. Wallace, the lawyer pressed. "Do you believe there is a conspiracy against you? Do you believe your family is trying to kill you?" "I do not believe it," I said. "I know it." The lawyer turned to the judge. "Paranoia. Your Honor, classic symptom of dementia. He believes his own children are assassins. He is detached from reality." I felt Morrison's hand on my arm. He was telling me to hold on. He was telling me to wait. But it was hard. It was the hardest thing I have ever done. To sit there and let a stranger call me crazy while the woman who tried to kill my wife sat 5 feet away looking like an angel. I closed my eyes. I counted backward from 10. I thought about the tensile strength of steel. I thought about how much pressure a beam can take before it snaps. I was close to the breaking point. Morrison stood up. He did not raise his voice. He did not object to the character assassination. He simply walked to the center of the room. "Your Honor," Morrison said, "we can debate Mr. Wallace's temperament all day. He is a stern man. He is a protective man. But this hearing is about the welfare of Beatrice Wallace. The petitioner claims she is the best person to care for her mother. She claims her mother's medical condition is the result of the father's negligence." Morrison paused. He turned and looked at the back of the courtroom. The double doors opened. A man walked in. He was wearing a white lab coat and carrying a thick file. It was Dr. Aris, the chief forensic pathologist for the state. "We would like to call a witness," Morrison said. Keisha's lawyer jumped up. "Objection. This is a guardianship hearing, not a criminal trial. We were not notified of this witness. This goes to the heart of the mother's medical condition," Morrison countered. "If you want to determine who is fit to care for her, you need to know what is killing her." The judge looked at Dr. Aris, then at Keisha. Keisha had stopped crying. She was staring at the doctor with a look of pure terror. She knew who he was. "Allow the witness," the judge said. Dr. Aris took the stand. He adjusted his glasses. He opened the file. "Dr. Aris," Morrison asked, "you analyzed the biological samples taken from Beatrice Wallace 3 days ago." "I did," Dr. Aris said. His voice was dry and clinical. "And did you find evidence of the benzodiazepines and alcohol we already know about?" "Yes," the doctor said, "but we ran a more comprehensive panel. We tested hair follicles." Keisha made a small squeaking sound. Her hand went to her mouth. "Explain to the court what a hair follicle test shows," Morrison said. "Hair grows at a steady rate," Dr. Aris explained. "It acts like a timeline. As it grows, it traps chemical compounds from the bloodstream. By analyzing segments of the hair, we can determine what substances were in a person's body months or even years ago." "And what did you find in Beatrice Wallace's hair?" Morrison asked. "We found thallium," Dr. Aris said. The courtroom went silent. Even the judge stopped writing. "Thallium," Morrison repeated. "Is that a medication?" "No," the doctor said. "Thallium is a heavy metal. It was used historically as rat poison. It is tasteless, odorless, and colorless. It causes hair loss, nerve damage, organ failure, and eventually death. It mimics natural illnesses like autoimmune disorders or dementia." "And was this a one-time exposure?" Morrison asked. "No," Dr. Aris said. He held up a chart with a red line that spiked and dipped over and over again. The levels indicate systematic ingestion over a period of at least 6 months. The doses were small at first, just enough to make her sick and confused. Then they increased. The spike 3 days ago was a lethal dose. This was not an accident. This was a slow, controlled execution. The judge looked at Keisha. Her face was a mask of horror, but it was not the horror of a daughter learning her mother was poisoned. It was the horror of a criminal realizing the microscope had found the fingerprint. "Thallium," Morrison said, turning to face Keisha. "It is not something you buy at the grocery store. It is something you have to order. Something you have to research." He walked over to the plaintiff's table and slammed a piece of paper down in front of Keisha. "This is a credit card statement from an account in your name," Keisha, Morrison said. "It shows a purchase from a chemical supply company in Mexico 6 months ago. The shipment was labeled as gardening supplies, but the customs manifest says thallium sulfate." Keisha stood up. Her chair fell backward. "I didn't," she stammered. "I didn't mean to. Blake told me it wouldn't hurt her. He said it would just make her confused so we could get the papers signed. He promised she wouldn't die." The admission hung in the air. She had just confessed in open court. She threw her husband under the bus, but she threw herself right along with him. She admitted she knew. She admitted she participated. The judge slammed her gavel down. The sound was like a thunderclap. "Bailiff," the judge barked, "take that woman into custody immediately." Keisha screamed. It was a high, piercing sound that shattered the dignity of the courtroom. 2 deputies moved in. They grabbed her arms. "No, Daddy, help me!" she yelled, looking at me. "Daddy, please do not let them take me. I am pregnant. I am scared." I looked at her. I looked at the daughter who had put rat poison in her mother's tea for 6 months. I looked at the woman who had watched her mother waste away and called it dementia. I stood up. I walked over to Beatrice. I put my hand on her shoulder. Beatrice looked at Keisha. Her eyes were dry. "You are not scared of jail," Keisha, Beatrice said softly. You are scared because the money is gone. The deputies handcuffed Keisha. They dragged her out of the courtroom. She was kicking and screaming, cursing me, cursing her mother, cursing Blake. I watched the doors close behind her. The silence returned to the room. The judge looked at me. She looked shaken. Mr. Wallace, the judge said, the motion for guardianship is denied with prejudice. I am issuing a permanent order of protection for you and your wife, and I am recommending to the district attorney that these charges be upgraded to attempted first-degree murder. Thank you. Your Honor, I said. I helped Beatrice stand up. We walked out of the courtroom together. We walked slowly. We were old. We were tired. We were parents who had just watched our only child be taken away in chains. But as we walked out into the sunlight, I felt the weight lift. The poison was gone. The threat was gone. The bridge had held. It was battered and scarred, but it was still standing. And that was all that mattered. The courtroom transformed instantly from a place of civil debate into a crime scene. The judge did not even have to finish her sentence before the doors at the back of the room swung open again. This time it was not a lone doctor entering. It was a tactical team of sheriff deputies led by Detective Johnson from the Homicide Division. They moved with the precision of a demolition crew. They flanked Keisha on both sides before she could even process that her guardianship petition had just become her arrest warrant. Keisha, stand up, Detective Johnson barked, his voice cut through her, sobbing like a knife. You are under arrest for the attempted first-degree murder of Beatrice Wallace and conspiracy to commit fraud. Keisha froze. She looked at the handcuffs dangling from the detective's belt. She looked at her lawyer, but he had already stepped away from her, creating a physical distance that screamed he wanted no part of a capital felony case. No, Keisha whispered. You cannot do this here. This is family court. You do not have jurisdiction. The detective did not argue jurisdiction. He grabbed her arm and spun her around. He slammed the cuffs onto her wrists. The metallic click echoed off the high ceilings. It was a sound I had waited to hear, but now that it was real, it felt heavy. It felt like failure. Not my failure, but the failure of a bloodline. Keisha began to thrash. She kicked out at the deputy. She screamed my name. Daddy, tell them to stop. Tell them it was a mistake. I am pregnant. You cannot put a pregnant woman in jail. I stood completely still. I watched the officer recite her rights. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you. Keisha did not remain silent. She looked at me, her face contorted into a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. This is your fault, she screamed, spitting as the deputies dragged her toward the side exit. You set me up. You waited until today to bring that doctor in. You wanted to humiliate me. You hate me. You have always hated me. I did not set you up. Keisha, I said, my voice calm despite the storm inside me. You bought the poison. You poured the tea. I just turned on the lights. She continued to scream as they hauled her out. She cursed me. She cursed her mother. She cursed the unborn child inside her for not being enough leverage to save her. The doors slammed shut, cutting off her voice. The silence that followed was heavy. The judge looked at me and nodded slowly. It was a nod of respect, but also of pity. She knew that winning this case was the worst kind of victory a father could have. While Keisha was being processed at the county jail, her husband was facing his own reckoning at the prison ward of the city hospital. Detective Johnson filled me in on the details later that evening as we sat in my living room. He played the audio from Blake's interrogation. It was pathetic. It was the sound of a man drowning and climbing on top of his wife to breathe. Blake was lying in a hospital bed with 2 broken fingers and a face that looked like raw meat. When the detectives told him about the thallium found in Beatrice's hair, he didn't even try to deny it. He didn't ask for a lawyer. He asked for a deal. It was Keisha, he wheezed on the recording. It was all her idea. She found the supplier online. She said her mother was taking too long to die. She said the pills were not working fast enough. I listened to his voice. It was desperate and thin. I told her to stop. Blake continued. I told her it was dangerous. But she said we needed the money for the baby. She said her father would never give us a dime while the old witch was alive. She mixed the doses. She put it in the sugar bowl. I just wanted to sell the house. I am a businessman, not a killer. She is the psycho. Detective Johnson paused the tape. He looked at me. We played this for your daughter an hour ago, he said. And I asked. And she cracked. Johnson said. He pressed play on a second recording. It was Keisha. She sounded manic. He is a liar, she shrieked. Blake forced me. He said the loan sharks were going to kill us both. He said if I didn't help him get the money, he would cut the baby out of me. He made me buy the poison. He stood over me while I ordered it. He tested it on the neighbor's dog first. I closed my eyes. They were eating each other. They were tearing each other apart piece by piece, hoping that if they threw enough mud at the partner, the law would lose sight of them. They admitted to everything in their effort to deny it. They admitted to the dog. They admitted to the sugar bowl. They admitted to the timeline. They were not partners anymore. They were enemies locked in a cage match, and the only prize was a few less years in a federal penitentiary. It is a race to the bottom, Johnson said, putting the recorder away. But the physical evidence points to both of them. Keisha bought it. Blake administered it. They are both going down for 20 years minimum. Conspiracy to commit murder carries the same weight as the act itself. And with the financial fraud added on, they will be old people before they see the outside of a cell. I looked at the empty fireplace. I thought about the little girl who used to sit on my knee and ask for pony rides. I wondered where she went. I wondered when the greed had eaten her soul. Was it when she met Blake, or was it there all along waiting for the right temperature to hatch? It didn't matter now. The structural failure was total. The building had collapsed. All that was left was to clear the debris. I walked out of the courthouse supporting Beatrice. The paparazzi were waiting at the bottom of the steps, but I ignored them. I saw a police cruiser parked near the transport van. The back door was open. Keisha was sitting inside. She was wearing an orange jumpsuit now. The gray dress was gone. Her hands were cuffed to her waist. She saw me. She did not scream this time. She did not beg. She looked at me with eyes that were cold and dead. There was no remorse in that gaze. There was only hatred. She hated me because I had won. She hated me because I had money and she did not. She hated me because I was the wall she could not break. I stopped. I looked at my daughter. I wanted to see a trace of the child I loved. I wanted to see regret. But I saw only a stranger. A dangerous stranger who would have stepped over my corpse to get to a bank account. Beatrice squeezed my arm. Her grip was strong. "Keep walking, Luther," she said softly. "Do not look back." I looked at Beatrice. She was looking forward toward the car, toward our future. She had already mourned the daughter she lost. She was done. I turned my head. I broke eye contact with Keisha. I turned my back on the van. I turned my back on the hatred. I helped my wife into the truck. I buckled her seatbelt. I walked around to the driver's side and climbed in. As I started the engine, I saw the transport van pull away in the rearview mirror. It turned a corner and disappeared. I put the truck in gear. "Where do you want to go, Beatrice?" I asked. "Home," she said. "To the lake." I nodded. We drove out of the city, leaving the wreckage of our family behind us. The road ahead was clear. The snow had melted, and for the first time in a long time, the foundation felt solid. 6 months later, I turned the key in the lock of the lake house front door. The mechanism clicked smoothly. I had replaced the locks immediately after the arrest, but this was the first time Beatrice and I had returned to stay since that Tuesday. It was November again, and the snow was falling just as hard as it had on the day I found my wife dying. But this time, the silence in the woods did not feel ominous. It felt clean. It felt like the world had been washed white and given a fresh start. I held the door open for Beatrice. She walked in without her cane. Her hair was growing back thick and silver, covering the patches where the thallium had caused it to fall out. She looked around the living room. The furniture was the same. The fireplace was cold, but the ghosts were gone. There was no smell of sickness. There was no echo of false laughter from the back deck. I walked to the sliding glass doors and looked out at the lake. The deck was empty. The table I had flipped was gone, replaced by a sturdy teak set I had built myself in the spring. I remembered the champagne glass shattering. I remembered Blake's arrogant smile. I remembered Keisha wrapped in fur while her mother lay in a coma. Those memories were still there like cracks in concrete, but they were no longer structural. We had reinforced the house with truth, and now it was standing strong again. I went to the kitchen and filled the kettle. I did not check for poison. I did not check for cameras. I made tea for my wife because it was a cold day, and we were alive to drink it. We sat by the window watching the snow pile up on the railing. We did not speak. We did not need to. We just sat in the quiet knowing that no one was plotting our demise. No one was counting our days. We were just two old people enjoying the view we had paid for with 40 years of labor and 6 months of hell. The peace was heavy, but it was ours. We had fought for it and we had won. The sound of a car engine in the driveway broke the silence, but I did not reach for my gun. I knew who it was. I walked to the porch and watched Jasmine hop out of her beat-up sedan. She was carrying a box of books and a backpack. She looked different than the terrified girl I had found behind the dumpster. She stood taller. Her eyes were bright. She was not looking over her shoulder anymore. Jasmine was moving in. We had cleared out the guest room, the room that Keisha used to demand for herself, and we had turned it into a study space. I walked down the steps to help her. I grabbed a heavy box from the trunk. "I got it, Grandpa," she said, reaching for it. "You have a bad back." I held onto the box. "I am 71, not invalid," I said. "I carried steel beams before your mother was born. I can carry your textbooks." She smiled. It was a real smile. It reminded me of Beatrice when she was young. We walked inside together. We spent the afternoon unpacking her life. I watched her arrange her law books on the shelf. I watched her pin up her acceptance letter to the state university. I had paid her tuition in full that morning. It came from the trust fund. It was the same money Keisha had tried to steal. It was the same money Blake had promised to the loan sharks. Now it was going to pay for the education of the woman who brought them down. It was the perfect allocation of resources. Jasmine turned to me holding a framed photo of her and Keisha taken years ago. She looked at it for a long time. "Do you think she misses us?" Jasmine asked quietly. I looked at the photo. I saw the mask on my daughter's face, the smile that hid the calculation. "I think she misses the lifestyle, Jasmine," I said honestly. "I think she misses the security, but I do not think she misses us. You cannot miss people you never really saw." Jasmine nodded. She placed the photo face down in a drawer. She closed the drawer. "I am ready for school," she said. "I am going to make you proud, Grandpa." "You already did," I said. "You saved this family." I left her to study and went back to the living room. The house felt full again. It wasn't full of noise and demands, it was full of potential. I had lost a daughter, but I had gained a granddaughter who understood the value of integrity. The lineage had skipped a generation, but the foundation was still good. Night fell early, covering the lake in darkness. I built a fire in the stone hearth. The dry wood caught quickly, snapping and popping as the flames licked upward. I sat in my armchair, the heat warming my face. Beatrice sat opposite me, knitting a scarf. The rhythmic click of her needles was the only sound in the room. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a single piece of paper. It was a photocopy of the forged power of attorney, the document Blake had waved in my face on this very property. It was the piece of paper they thought was a golden ticket. It was the piece of paper that proved they thought I was weak. I looked at the jagged signature. I looked at my wife's name scrawled by a hand fighting against poison. It was a document of hate. It was a document of greed. I leaned forward. Beatrice stopped knitting. She looked at the paper in my hand. She knew what it was. "Do it," she said softly. I tossed the paper into the fire. It landed on a burning log, the edges curled instantly, turning black. The paper ignited. I watched the flames consume the words. I watched the signature vanish into ash. I watched the lies turn into smoke and disappear up the chimney into the cold night air. It burned fast. It burned bright. And then it was gone. Beatrice reached out and took my hand. Her grip was strong. Her skin was warm. "We lost a child, Luther," she said. Her voice was steady, but her eyes were wet. "We lost the family we thought we had, but we kept our dignity. And we kept each other." I squeezed her hand. "That is all that matters," I said. We sat there watching the fire die down until it was just glowing embers. The screen faded to black in my mind. The story was over. The structure had been tested by fire and ice and betrayal. It had groaned. It had cracked. But it did not fall. I was Luther Wallace. I was a structural engineer, and my house was still standing. This experience taught me the hardest truth of all. Blood does not make you family. Loyalty does. Respect does. I spent 40 years building bridges to connect people, but sometimes you have to burn a bridge to keep the enemy from crossing. We often think that cutting off toxic family members is cruel, but it is actually an act of survival. You cannot keep warming a snake in your house and be surprised when it bites you. True wealth isn't the house or the money. It is the peace of mind knowing the person sitting next to you by the fire actually loves you. If you agree that dignity is worth fighting for, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories of justice.